Vladimir Putin and his Kremlin commanders are burning their army alive, and they're finding it increasingly difficult to recruit enough new troops to replace those that they've lost. This right here is the beginning of the end. On paper, there's no way it should ever come to this. When the war began, Russia could call on a vastly larger force than its opponent. It didn't just have a massive manpower advantage, but it also had advantages in every other metric that mattered, from the number of tanks and armored vehicles at its disposal to its air force, which was and remains far larger and stronger than that of Ukraine. With a good tactical plan and smart strategic thinking, Russia could and should have been able to achieve its objectives. It would still have suffered losses, but it could have done a dramatically better and more efficient job in this war if it had taken it seriously enough and not made the fatal mistakes of underestimating its opponent so terribly and acting with such stubborn arrogance over and over again. Instead, Russia did make those mistakes, and not only did it fail to achieve any of its listed objectives, but as time went by, its losses started to mount up, passing one grim milestone after another. Back in July 2024, reports revealed that the country had suffered a staggering 500,000 estimated casualties. Less than a year later, in June 2025, the Kremlin's casualty numbers surpassed 1 million. And the casualties have continued, day after day, week after week, month after month. By early 2026, it was being reported that the total losses of the Russian army had surpassed 1.25 million soldiers either killed or wounded. This is unprecedented. Since the end of the Second World War, Russia, or the Soviet Union, has been involved in multiple wars. It suffered 120 fatalities in Korea between 1950 and 1953, 669 more in Hungary in 1956, 96 in Czechoslovakia in 1968, between 14,000 and 16,000 in its 10-year war with Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, and another 12,000 to 25,000 estimated fatalities in 2 wars with Chechnya in the 90s and 2000s. Even if we add all of those fatalities up from multiple wars over 6 different decades, the total is a mere fraction of the hundreds of thousands of estimated fatalities Russia has endured in Ukraine. The same applies to total casualties too, not just fatalities. Indeed, after analyzing the numbers, the Ukrainian news outlet Agentstva News wrote on Telegram, "The total losses in the Russian army during the 4 years of war were 5 times higher than the total number of Soviet casualties during all wars since the Great Patriotic War. They were 17 times higher than the Soviet Union's losses in the war in Afghanistan and 11 times higher than Russian losses in both Chechen wars." This truly has been by far the bloodiest and most brutal battle for Russia since World War II. And it's only getting worse. The figures show that Russia's rate of losses has only increased over time. In 2025, for example, Russia suffered the same total number of casualties as it had suffered in the first 3 years of the war combined. In the final month of 2025, Russia lost around 35,000 troops. The trend continued into 2026, with another estimated around 30,000 losses in January. There are 2 big reasons why this has happened and continues to happen. The first boils down to one word: stubbornness. Throughout the entire war, Russia has shown a remarkable unwillingness to deviate from its doctrines. It's persisted with the same wasteful tactics time and time again, even when those exact strategies have failed to yield positive results on the battlefield. Russia's commanders have refused to adjust their optics in any way. They've thrown countless men into the meat grinder, relying almost exclusively on what Ukraine has labeled the meat assault tactic, which basically consists of Russian assault squads being ordered to attack Ukrainian positions without much or even any armored support to assist or protect them. To make matters worse, many of the soldiers who make up those assault teams are poorly trained and equipped, giving them even less chance of survival. As such, it's hardly surprising that Russia has seen so many losses, as it's basically made human sacrifice a fundamental pillar of its entire military philosophy in Ukraine. The Kremlin has made clear to the world and to its own army that it has no qualms about putting their lives on the line and letting the stacks of Russian bodies build up, if that's what it takes to capture Ukraine, one slim sliver of land at a time. On the one hand, there's a certain level of twisted logic to Russia's tactics. Since the country does have a significantly larger force than Ukraine, it should in theory be able to grind down its enemy over time, using these brute force assaults to wear away at their defenses before eventually breaking through and pushing on towards victory. On the other hand, this isn't how a major military superpower should act. A country with strong military minds and tacticians would never stick with a tactic that's proven to be so wasteful and worthless, producing heavy losses for only the most minimal gains. It should be able to think more strategically than that, using the many advantages at its disposal to devise ways to penetrate the Ukrainian defensive lines and capture key territories. But Russia doesn't seem to dedicate much time, effort, or energy to strategic thinking. It prefers instead to single-mindedly push on with the same plan as always, stubbornly believing that it'll all work out in the end. That's why, even years into the war, we still see the same sorts of stories playing out, the same wasteful assaults, the same extraordinary imbalances in terms of losses and casualties between the two sides. Look at Kupansk, for example. The city sits in a strategic location in the Kharkiv region. It's well known as a crucial railroad junction, with strong transport links deeper into Ukrainian territory. As such, it's been a prime target for Russian forces for quite some time, and control of the city has passed from one side to the other on several occasions over the course of the war. Russia seized it way back in February of 2022, for example, before Ukraine regained control during the 2022 Kharkiv counteroffensive. Russian forces pushed back into the city in late May 2024, but were forced out soon after. By late 2025, the city was once more partially occupied by the Kremlin's troops. But in September 2025, Ukrainian forces yet again carried out a counteroffensive operation, aimed at clearing the city of remaining Russian saboteurs and reconnaissance groups. Some of the country's best fighters were dispatched to the area, including members of the famous 13th Katyr Brigade. Slowly but surely, they stealthily made their way through the forests around the city during the autumn months, before pushing forward into Kupansk and eventually raising their national flag above the ruined remains of the city's council building. Kyiv's troops were startlingly effective. According to an intelligence assessment shared with the British military, Ukrainian forces managed to kill 27 times as many Russians as they lost in their fight to regain control of Kupansk. While the exact figures have not been released, it's believed that the advancing Ukrainians managed to surround around 200 Russian troops, while wounding or killing thousands more in the area over the course of 2025. Regardless of the exact statistics, a 27-to-1 kill ratio is mind-blowing. It shows just how heavily the scales have tipped in Ukraine's favor, and how badly Russia is bleeding because of its nonsensical and downright foolish tactics. This isn't a one-off. Statistics and military reports show that Ukraine is consistently outperforming Russia far and wide along the hundreds of miles of front lines separating the two forces. The kill ratio at certain strategic locations has reached as high as 1 to 20 or even 1 to 25, while the overall average has been around 1 to 6 or 1 to 7, varying slightly depending on the source. That means that even in the more closely competitive areas, Ukraine's forces are still taking out up to 7 Russian troops for every one of their own that gets killed. Now, before we look at why these numbers are so utterly unsustainable, and the other big reason behind them, you're watching the military show. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Russia's tactical incompetence only tells half the story behind its catastrophic losses. Ukraine also deserves a huge amount of credit. Because while Russia's entire campaign has revolved around stubborn attitudes and unwavering commitment to the same wasteful strategies, Ukraine's defensive effort has been a completely different story. From day one of the war, Kyiv's forces have proven that they know how to innovate. They're not afraid to think outside of the box, shake things up, and adjust their strategies to suit the changing conditions of the conflict. Never sticking with the same tactic for too long, always searching for new ways to surprise and catch its enemy off guard, Ukraine's war has been built on the bedrock of adaptability, and it's reaped the rewards of that approach on countless occasions. In fact, in many ways, it's because of Ukraine's ability to think up of so many clever strategies that the country is still in this war today, and that it's done such a stellar job of defending its territories and preventing Russia from pushing on and achieving its goals. We can look, for example, at how well Ukraine has adapted to drone warfare, as an example of its remarkable ability to innovate on the fly. When Russia began using drones to bombard Ukrainian towns and cities, wiping out civilian infrastructure and killing countless innocent people, Kyiv could have buckled or broken. Instead, it adapted and it evolved. It worked on developing its own drone army, with dozens of defense companies up and down the country, creating a varied arsenal of unmanned aerial and surface vehicles to strike back at Russia. It became a world leader in drone technology, orchestrating attacks like the iconic Operation Spiderweb strikes on Russian airfields in the summer of 2025, and countless more successful attacks on enemy fuel depots, oil refineries, production plants, ammunition storage facilities, and other high-value targets. Ukraine's forces also found ways to harness their drones along the length and breadth of the front lines, turning entire areas into veritable death traps for any unfortunate Russian assault squads that dared step foot inside. This in turn has seen Ukrainian drones take out increasing numbers of Russian personnel as the war has progressed. 24,600 in October of 2025, for example, followed by 26,100 a month later, then a staggering 33,000 a month after that. And drones aren't the only way that Ukraine is whittling down Russia's manpower advantage. The country's armed forces have also developed other effective frontline tactics, like the bait-and-bleed strategy, which revolves around luring Russian assault teams down preset paths, pretending to flee from defensive locations, lulling the enemy into a false sense of security and confidence before raining down fire on them with artillery, drones, and loitering munitions from above. Through tactics like these, Ukraine isn't just dealing a massive blow to the Russian army's strength in depth, but is also preventing the Kremlin war machine from even being able to advance in many key areas. Indeed, charts show Russia is advancing at some of the slowest rates in its entire military history, gaining the tiniest pockets of ground in areas like Kupansk, Chasiv Yar, and Pokros, while losing thousands of troops in the process. And it's only likely to get even worse for Putin's forces from here on out, because Ukraine isn't simply settling for its current numbers. It wants to go even further, with Kyiv setting its army the target of increasing Russian losses to around 50 to 60,000 troops a month. If that happens, there'd be no coming back for Russia, and the prospect of the country having to admit defeat and finally retreat from Ukrainian soil would become increasingly likely. Here's why. For the first few years of the war, from Moscow's perspective, it didn't necessarily matter so much that the country suffered such heavy losses. Even when Ukraine was able to take out 15, 20, or even 30,000 Russian troops per month, Russia was always able to counteract those losses. It had several methods at its disposal to do this, like offering hefty financial incentives to new recruits, targeting people from poorer areas and promising that their families would be richly rewarded if they choose to sign up and fight. Russian recruiters also put pressure on ethnic minorities, like immigrants from Central Asian nations, sometimes even going as far as threatening them with deportation or imprisonment if they refuse to fight. The country has even been seen offering convicts, including murderers and rapists, the opportunity to cut their prison terms short if they agree to fight in Ukraine. Thanks to these tactics, Russia was consistently able to meet and even exceed its recruitment targets. And this made life so much harder for Ukraine, because even when its army was experiencing major success on the ground, taking out scores of Russian troops and regaining lost land, more and more enemy assault squads soon arrived to replace those that had been lost, like some sort of invincible video game-style army. Russia appeared to have an endless supply of soldiers, never failing to replenish its ranks and keep up the pressure all along the front. But no army is endless. Even a vast country like Russia, with its population in excess of 140 million people, doesn't have an infinite supply of soldiers to call on. And eventually, Ukraine's efforts have started to prove too much for the Kremlin to cope with. In January 2026, for example, records show that Russia lost 9,000 more troops than it was able to recruit. According to the United Kingdom's Defense Secretary, John Healey, this isn't an isolated incident either. It's becoming a trend. For several months, the Russian army has steadily started to lose more men than it can bring in to replace them, and it's not hard to see why. Several years into the war, the number of Russians who are actually willing to fight in Ukraine has dramatically diminished, and most of the people who wanted to sign up have already done so. Now, even with recruiters offering big ruble rewards for new recruits, a lot of the able-bodied individuals still living in Russia aren't all that interested in signing up for what they see as a suicide mission. In fact, reports show that a staggering 1 in 25 Russian men have either been killed or maimed since the conflict began, leaving fewer and fewer behind that are willing and able to replace them. Morale has also plummeted, because Russians aren't blind. When the war began, they might have believed the Kremlin's claims that this so-called special military operation was necessary, and that it should all be over in a matter of weeks. But as the years have gone by, levels of trust in the government have fallen off a cliff. Countless Russian families have been forced to mourn the losses of their loved ones, or seen fathers, brothers and sons come home with life-changing injuries and broken minds. This is going to make it increasingly difficult for Russia to hit its recruitment targets, and even if it manages to miraculously do so, those targets might not be high enough. If Ukraine is able to up its game even further and start taking out 40,000 or 50,000 or even more Russians each month, killing around 60% or more of them and wounding the rest, there's no way Russia will have any chance of maintaining its army. Its numbers will at last begin to decline. When that happens, offensive operations along the front lines will slow down. The country's commanders will have to abandon certain offensive efforts to prioritize others. Assault squads will get smaller and weaker, as new recruits will have even less training and military experience than those that came before them. Morale will continue to decline at a record rate, with more and more soldiers becoming more likely to either desert their posts or wave the white flag and surrender to the enemy at the earliest opportunity. And all of this adds up to one clear conclusion: Russia will have zero chance of achieving any sort of victory in Ukraine. Even if the country increases its reliance on mercenaries and tries hiring soldiers from places like North Korea, India, Pakistan, Nepal and Africa, as it has been doing, it's going to find it impossible to find enough of those people. In fact, statistics show that Russia has managed to recruit around 17,000 of these mercenaries so far from various countries, which would barely be enough to cover half a month's losses in Ukraine. So, while Putin and his sycophantic commanders continue to make fake claims about capturing valuable land and pushing on for victory, the truth is very different. Not only is the country failing to make gains at reasonable speed, but it's losing more troops than ever before, and is increasingly unable to cover up those losses. Now, you can learn more about how bad the situation has become for Putin in this video, which explores how the Russian president was forced to watch his forces collapse like a deck of cards in the face of a recent Ukrainian counter-offensive. Or check out this video for a deeper analysis of how the entire war has been the stupidest decision of Putin's career, one that's set to wreck his legacy and ruin his regime once and for all. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our channel too, for more insightful analysis like this and breaking news reports from the front lines of Ukraine.